Welcome back. You're watching Sunday edition here on KTN News. And now the big story, the focus has shifted to what will be happening in the 41,000 polling stations across the country, manned by over 262 polling clerks and over 91,000 presiding officers and deputy presiding officers. And that is, of course, following Friday's big ruling by the Court of Appeal that affirmed that the presidential election results declared or announced at the constituency level will be final. Is this victory for the National Super Alliance, the opposition? Is it a loss for Jubilee, which have been supporting the IEBC in this matter? We shall be delving into those issues and trying to separate the facts from the noise. And to begin us, to start us off, let's take a look at the ruling itself by the judges of the of the Court of Appeal, just upholding that earlier decision by Justice Odunga in the High Court.
Once the constituency returning officer has declared the results, those results are final and only a court of competent jurisdiction can interfere with them.
All right, so the summary of the ruling by the judges of the Court of Appeal, they are just basically saying that the Kenyan Constitution, the best way possible is to let the polling, what happens at the polling stations, count. Did you expect this, Dismas?
Well, that's what one would have expected. But even before you go to the detail, there's been a lot of miscommunication that IEBC actually was opposed to the ruling by the High Court. What IEBC wanted was a clarification from the Court of Appeal to know their position. Given the fact that right now they've got a very heavy burden and responsibility, there is a criminal liability on the commissioner as well as the staffers if you do the wrong thing. So it was an issue of clarification. And it's also interesting that right now the IEBC has rejected the offer by Mwangi Kiunjuri to be their spokesman. You recall yesterday, Mwangi Kiunjuri said that they're going to work together with IEBC to go to the Supreme Court, but they've rejected that. But going back to the historical perspective, I think the person who is really happy today, or rather the group of people who are very happy today, is James Orengo, Mutula Kilonzo Jr., and Boni Kalwale. And you recall during the Windsor meeting, the three are the ones who came up with that clause saying that what happens at the constituency level is going to be final. And that addresses the concerns by the Commission. You recall again, he said when he came to Kenya, that, and he used the Tharaka Nithi as an example, that when you're done with the polling at Tharaka Nithi and you're waiting for results in Nairobi, something happens in between and you lose your clarity of objective. And you also recall Samuel Kivitu saying that Asam was calling his returning officers, but he was not able to place their location or their whereabouts. So for me, I think this is a win for democracy. It's not a win for NASA. It's not a loss for Jubilee. But the Kenyans are going to be better off. And
you mentioned something about IEBC. Obviously, they were seeking, it was an appeal, seeking clarification on that High Court earlier ruling. But there was an argument by IEBC that the chairman of Wafula Chebukati, for this instance, is the returning officer for the presidential election, and having the presidential election results that are declared at the constituency level being final is taking away that mandate from him, that constitutional mandate seemingly from him, because he is the returning officer for the presidential candidate. What will IEBC be saying about this? It seems like a loss to them.
No, you know, for Chebukati, he wanted the ceremonial role of being the only person who is going to keep the nation under suspense maybe for 2 days, that I'm the one who is going to give the last figure. So really that was just a ceremonial responsibility. And Justice Ouko, when he was reading his part of the judgment, he made it very clear that in Kenya we need very solid systems to guarantee a free, fair, credible process. And he reminded Chebukati that it's absurd for him to imagine that is the only competent officer at IEBC who can declare this election. And now the ball is in Chebukati's court to ensure that those returning officers are very solid, they've been vetted, and they understand the responsibilities, especially on the criminal liability. And when you look at that decision, two things came out. Chebukati has been told, your duty is to give the winner the certificate and notify the Chief Justice who has won and notify the incumbent president who has won. The rest, leave it to the returning officers. And I know the returning officers are meeting today somewhere in Nairobi. So he needs to remind them of their responsibility. And, you know, there are some people who are making an argument that you are likely to have 290 petitions coming from all those constituencies, that you don't have sufficient time to listen to them. in the event there's going to be a presidential petition. Kenyans must not be worried of the 290 petitions. Indeed, if they're going to be the 290 petitions, let it be the duty of the Supreme Court today to start anticipating and planning for that. That if you have 290 petitions coming up from all the returning officers, are you going to sort it out? And I also think that the Court of Appeal, they were very elaborate in their ruling, and they said they're not going to sit back and allow any mischief to take place. And I think as Kenyans, we need to give them a pat on the back and ask Kakavemba to speak to Mwangi Kiunjuri and tell him he must not run to offer his services to IBC without request.
Right. What I wanted to say is that there's something that probably I need to also bring out that was made very clear in that ruling, the role of the chairman of the IEBC. You know, the current constitution gives some conditions for you to be declared president.
Right.
One of them is that you have to have garnered 50% plus one. And you also have to have garnered at least 25% in more than 24 counties. So now that job, again, remains solely the job of the chairman. That is, again, it came out very, very clearly. And that is just going to be, you know, about looking at the figures and seeing whether that threshold has been met. And if it has been met, then you proceed and declare someone president. If it has not been met, then you declare a runoff. So that, again, remains the role of the IEBC
so he still has work
chairman. So he still has work because that, as the threshold been met or not, still remains the work of the IEBC chair. It is not about the tallying, because this anybody can do. It is about, once these figures have come, the final tally figures from all the 290. Now, it is for him to establish whether the threshold has been made before making a declaration, either to declare someone a president or declare a runoff.
In the run-up to this ruling, Jubilee seemingly wanted IEBC, the chairman or the headquarters here in Nairobi, to have that final say. Is this a loss for Jubilee?
Now, I want to second the position that he has taken. You see, as a country, we've some things that are beyond political partisanship. And it is important for us to start to appreciate that. This really, I am among the people who don't want it to be a NASA versus Jubilee thing. And honestly, it wasn't. Maina Kiai actually is the one who took the initiative, and that was civil society, independent of any of these political. But you know, for political expediency, success, as they say, success has many fathers, failure is an orphan. So nobody now would want to look like they've lost. But the truth of the matter is that Kenya has won. And it is important for us to be very clear. You know, in 1988, I was old enough to remember the Mlolongo voting. I am just saying that because from where I stand, this is about our history of electoral procedures. Are we strengthening them or are we weakening them? You remember in 1988, even a shorter queue, as in obvious.
The election.
You get that? And we've had such challenges from that time up to today. Now we have started looking at how now do we ensure we have a foolproof electoral process. This is a win for the country. I think if you know, of course, you will never get to know the intentions of man. But if anybody wants to compromise this election, it will. That really has made it so difficult. The number of people you have to deal with, you can not possibly maintain secrecy with that kind of people who need to be compromised for you to do what you want to do. And this means that the whole thing has now been taken back to Kenyans. And you know, I always like reminding people that elections are about sovereignty. It is the only time that we get the chance to directly express our sovereignty. So any loophole for anybody to play around with our free will should not be encouraged, should not be entertained.
Before you move away from
the legal
line of argument,
yes.
In fact, I think the Court of Appeal merely reaffirmed the law and actually did not per se take powers from the chairman. If anything, the Court of Appeal only ensured that the chairman does not usurp more powers than he has. For example, if you look at the dicta, you look at the decree issued by the Court of Appeal, I sat there for 4 hours, they are saying that when the votes have been counted at the polling station, not at the constituency level, at the polling station, the returning officer and the presiding officer and the clerk, in presence of the agent, once that form is signed, in fact, that form cannot be interfered with by any other officer of the Electoral Commission, not even the returning officer at the constituency level. What the returning officer will be doing then, he will simply look if the paper is properly signed. And then she or he will forward the same to the National Tallying Center. Still, the chairman of the Electoral Commission actually tallies. He looks at the results from Tarakaniti and Muhoroni and Mombasa, and then says, yes, as forms presented, the president has garnered this number of votes. So it is not new. If you talk to the insiders in the IEBC, that's actually what has been happening. The problem was the results from a voting center or station in Muhoroni, about 70 people cast their votes. When they actually reach in Nairobi later, you discover there were 55. So that's all that the chairman has been denied to do. And I think that's very, very much in order, and the Court of Appeal has merely reaffirmed the law.
All right.
Yeah.
Husband, what's your take on it?
This is a ruling that was written in the wall, and just like my learned friend here is saying, it is something that has been in the law. If you look at, even before the High Court ruling, I think there were precedences that were set. If you look at the Shakbal versus Ali Hassan Joe case, I think there was a pronouncement to that effect, that the declaration at the constituency level has an instrument, and that instrument is final. No one can change it. So the mere fact that it has to be taken to the National Tallying Center did not presuppose that somebody was going to mutilate it. And the law has made it clear that whatever happens at the constituency level is final. It is not a win for either of the sides, and I think the noise that people are making is what lawyers would call superfluous. I would want to believe that this law would favor anyone who is in the race, irrespective of time and place. But the most important thing, I think, if I may echo what Dismas has said, is the fact that now returning officers have a responsibility, bestowed on them. And of course, if they do anything that is mischievous, they are culpable to the criminal level. And that, therefore, means that they have to be very meticulous. Before they even have that document signed, right, they have to ensure that everything, is in place.
And Ben, in terms of appeal, I think Unjuri, it should be allowed to appeal. And, of course, IEBC is not interested. He can appeal through the right procedures if he so wishes, and even IEBC can appeal, but it will be a question of determining jurisprudence. In my honest view, I do not imagine. Looking at the history in 1992, how the judges actually tracked the history of our elections, and they cited law in the Commonwealth, and they cited documents. In all this time, I do not imagine that the Supreme Court could actually come out with a different verdict.
All this perceived growth of Kenya's electioneering law and practice. Let's now take a look at some of the responses or reactions to that ruling by the Court of Appeal, starting with what has been said a lot here, that one by the CS Mwangi Kiunjuri. Let's listen in to what he had to say concerning that ruling.
Hakuna vile tutakubaliana na uamuzi wa koti kwamba ati kura ihesabiwe na kura ya rais itangazwe kwenye constituency. Manake tukifanya hivyo ni kumaanisha wale returning officers wakiwa wamenunuliwa ama wawe na nia mbaya watangaze ile uchaguzi. Hiyo ni mambo ya kuleta fitina na vita ndani ya Kenya.
So is this the official position of Jubilee? But before we get into that, let's listen into the NASA presidential flag bearer, Raila Odinga, also reacting to the same.
Kama imeamua ni final. Nasikia hiyo? Nasikia? Tuliwaambia hatutaki ile ujanja ya kupeleka Nairobi na kufanya ukarabati. Sasa mahakama imekubaliana na sisi. Sasa wakora, sasa maraba yao mara hii itafichuka. Siku miezi ni ngapi? Siku yao ya 40 zimefika.
So judging by those two reactions by Raila Odinga and Mwangi Kiunjuri, it seems it's a loss for Jubilee and it's a win for NASA. To the layman, Dismas, what do you say about the reaction by Raila Odinga and Mwangi Kiunjuri's promise to appeal this?
Now, the presence of Ishmael is making me remember my law. But when you go to Article 73 of the Constitution, it's very clear on what a public servant is supposed to do, or a state officer, and Mwangi Kiunjuri fits squarely in that category. And when you also go to the Leadership and Integrity Act, Section 23, they're allowed to participate in politics. And I think maybe for the next Senate or National Assembly, they should review the Leadership and Integrity Act to raise the bar. Because when Mr. Mwangi Kiunjuri speaks today, you do not know whether he's speaking on behalf of the Jubilee administration, whether he's speaking on behalf of the political party, or he's expressing his views as an individual. And any rational human being in Kenya would want to imagine that he must have compared notes with President Kenyatta before he spoke, or maybe compared notes with Raphael Tuju before he spoke. But with that as it may, I think this is the kind of thing we are supposed to run away from. The next administration, be it Kenyatta or Raila Odinga, they should run away from having politicians in the cabinet. So that if you need to make this kind of statements, let it be made by Kavemba or Tuju, so that we know this is the Jubilee Party position. And you know, for instance, when you read his body language, the fella is really annoyed. He's very furious. He's saying that elections are going to be compromised. And he's made a statement: in a normal, solid democracy, he would be disciplined today, and the DPP should have swung into action, because he is claiming in his statement that it's very easy to compromise returning officers, meaning that this is something that he's been thinking of over a long time on how to compromise returning officers. So I hope that the party leader, President Kenyatta, is actually going to discipline him, or if the president doesn't do that because of his schedule, he's busy campaigning, then the DPP would find some space in his schedule to ask him to record a statement on that.
Do you distance yourself from Mwangi Kiunjuri's pronouncements?
Yes, of course I do. I've already given my position that I'm very happy with this ruling. And I don't actually think that the party, as Jubilee, has taken a position on that matter. Probably they will. And of course, you know he doesn't speak for the party. And probably for his ministry.
I'm not so sure.
No, he doesn't. That one you can be sure. The party has a leadership. Our spokesman, official spokesman, is Sec Gen, who is Honorable Raphael Tuju, and we have a party leader and deputy party leader. He's not in any of the leadership structures. What I would want to say is that probably that is his personal opinion, and he has a right to it if he wants to pursue it as him. The lawyer will tell us whether as a member of government there is anything that restricts him from taking that kind of, but I don't think that is a binding position. I've also seen other Jubilee people who've been given different views about it, because it actually, I think it actually is not in the interest of Jubilee for anybody to come out as if this is what we wanted, because I don't think we ever sat down somewhere and agreed that we don't want a foolproof electoral process as Jubilee. Right. And if we get a ruling that is progressive in terms of strengthening our electoral process, you know where we've come from. You know what we've gone through just because of electoral disputes. So sometimes we have to be bigger people. We have to be patriotic, to look at what is in the interest of this country, irrespective of who wins. Because we want to get to a point that it really doesn't matter. It's not a life and death matter. It's just an election, and it is a process to get our leadership, and we get back to our lives. And the only way we can do that is to ensure that the process itself is foolproof, so that even if you lose by 10 votes, you have no basis to incite anybody, because everybody is sure of the credibility of your loss or victory. Yes.
So you don't think Jubilee might want to appeal this?
You know, I am of the opinion that it will be a fight in an exercise in futility, and I want to agree with my learned friend there that I do not see. I also took time to listen to that ruling, and I was so impressed. I was saying, like, okay, now this is now breathing life into the Kenyan Constitution, the 2010 Kenyan Constitution, a well-reasoned judgment, well-reasoned. You know, there is a time we listened to the ruling, the Supreme Court ruling. If you compare the Supreme Court ruling on the election dispute and the ruling that dispute, you'll see the difference. As in, anybody who followed, it beats logic to appeal.
First of all, before you continue, why is Kenya, I want you to answer a question about if this could end up at the Supreme Court, if that's a possibility. But before you do that, you've said everybody here has agreed that this was just affirming what the law says. Yes. Is Kenya such a litigation country that we need such kind of drama to just say what's in the
very litigious, actually. Very litigious. We are known as a country that even if you doubt the paternity of your child or your father, you will actually take them to court. We have all manner of cases in court, and that's not wrong. That's not evil, actually. It's right. A society that is coming from less knowledge to a more knowledgeable status would always want to confirm and inquire through an arbitrator or through a more middle ground arbitrator what the truth is. But I just wanted to say one thing so that you also capture my sentiments. This ruling And I am very careful. I know how NASA supporters will take it. This ruling can actually can turn to haunt the NASA supporters. It is not obvious that this ruling is in favor of the NASA fraternity.
How so?
How so? If Raila Odinga loses in August, we are now so happy about this ruling. There will be no noise, no commotion, because we have conducted elections in a free and fair environment. That would be a complete, like sealing his fate politically. If he actually loses, and I'm just suspecting that there's another case in court which you all know to confirm if the contract will be retained in Dubai or not. I have my own suspicions that this case might be matched or might have some semblance with this particular one. The contract may not necessarily be suspended, but there might be certain rules attached to the contract that Raila Odinga is happy about and Uhuru Kenyatta is probably comfortable with. Now, if such procedures are put in place, and then Raila Odinga loses actually in August, then you can see what I mean, that the ruling can turn to completely haunt the NASA fraternity.
You will have no reason
I
to
say
go to
this
the Supreme Court.
because of how NASA plans. It's not about numbers. You see, they are talking about we have 2 million in Luo Nyanza, 1 million in Kisii, and in the Kakamega, Western, we have 4 million. And then they are saying that all this is 10 million. Excuse me. How many people in the western part of Kenya come out to vote on the voting day? And compare with how many people from their sick beds come to vote from the Mount Kenya area. So I think the numbers are still not enough to be bragging about, really. It's about how you plan and how you get your people to vote on the voting day.
Ben, I think the lawyers misread the point. This election is not about Raila Odinga or Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. It's about the nation, so that we have predictable systems for unpredictable outcomes. What he has explained is very solid. If everything is proper and Raila loses the election, and then he tells people to go to the streets and engage in violence, then everybody will tell him, Mr. Raila Odinga, no, on this one, you are wrong. We want to go on with our lives. So we shouldn't be looking at this and saying, wait a minute, the NASA supporters are going to be pointed here. It's a plus for democracy.
Yeah, there is no loophole for incitement.
Yeah, we don't want to be nervous. When you cast your ballot, you want to go back home and wait for news, and then on the 10th of August, go back to your business.
After the decision by Kenyans. Hesbon.
Yeah. I think the point that he's that he's adequately underscored is the fact that this has nothing to do with this election, but it is about the elections in Kenya. Today, the next election, wherever we will be having elections. And of course, it also affirms the fact that this is about the people of Kenya. So if it's going to cut Raila the wrong way or Uhuru the wrong way, so be it, so long as we are rooted in the Constitution. But probably the most important thing is to understand that politicians have a proclivity to ride on anything that is good. So to that extent, probably NASA is riding on this, not necessarily because they feel that this will make them win the election. They're riding on this because they've anchored something in our Constitution that strongly, cements the position of a credible elections in our Constitution. But it's unfortunate that sometimes when they make these pronouncements, they give the public the impression that, now we're on the winning side. So you look at what the Right Honorable Raila is saying, it gives the NASA supporters the feeling that, this time around, we are likely to win.
Even without going to vote.
Yeah, even without going to vote. Which, from what I see, I think, sparks some emotions. And then when you have the reaction from Mwangi Kiunjuri, it gives you the sense that a politician is a politician. Whether you tell them go and become a doctor or become a cabinet secretary, there is that politics in him. And probably what Kavemba is saying should be put in context. He may not be speaking for the party, but he could be saying what the party wants somebody to say outside there. And what a better person than the cabinet secretary for devolution, So we cannot say that he's not speaking for the party. Neither can we say that he's speaking for the party. The question is, whatever he's saying, who is it likely to benefit? And I think it would be very unfortunate if Jubilee as a political party pushes on with this, because it will now seem like this was a loss for Jubilee. It was not a loss for Jubilee. And I think they should be happy with the ruling.
All right. So bottom line, as Kenya prepares for the election, 43 days to go, 41,000 polling stations, 262,000 polling clerks, 91,000 presiding and deputy presiding officers, according to this special report on the Standard, the Sunday Standard. 150,000 police officers, 2 fixed-wing aeroplanes, 2 choppers, There's even a bot. 92 magistrates. That is to cater for the 14,552 candidates in the August 8th general election. From where you sit, Dismas, is the IEBC, is this nation ready for the election?
Well, you know, when you look at the figures you've mentioned, 500,000 personnel and the kind of money being spent in this election, it only points to one direction, that there is a trust deficit in Kenya. The only reason why you have people are going the extra mile is we don't trust each other when it comes to elections. When you look at the elections which were held recently in the UK and France, they were seamless. You didn't have all these kind of resources. You know, people wake up in the morning. Yeah. People wake up in the morning, they cast their ballots, and at 9 o'clock their local time, a winner is declared. But in Kenya, it's life and death. And it goes back to business, that you have special interest groups, cartels, who finance this election. And for us in Kenya, every transaction is an opportunity by politicians to make money. The reason why there is a case in court around the Dubai printer, it's not because those people there want a free, fair, and credible election. No, it's commercial catfights. People are looking at an opportunity to make money at every space in this process. People just want to make money. But I think moving forward, when we know that it doesn't matter who sits at State House, there's going to be equity across the nation, then people will stop taking these elections so serious as if it's life and death. Because the reason why today we are fighting for this election, the reason, for instance, a section of Kenya wants Raila Odinga to become president, is that they are saying it's going to be our time to eat. They're fighting for Raila so that they get the senior government positions and they get access to contracts. Because now the accusation for Jubilee is that the two communities that are beneficiaries of this administration have squeezed all the appointments and all the public resources. So if you're not a member of that community, your economic life comes to a standstill. But when we get to the place where we say, it doesn't matter who is at the State House or who is the Speaker of the Senate or the National Assembly. If it's about healthcare, there's going to be a provision for every Kenyan, then we'll stop seeing this as a very high-stakes game.
Mutinda, what is your thoughts on this preparedness by the IEBC? A lot of heavy investment, heavy deployment. Are we ready for the election?
Yes, we are. Of course, we are funding this. And yeah, this is a Kenyan thing. It's not like IEBC is from elsewhere. And they give a budget. They indicated what exactly they need. And fortunately, I've not had them complain that we've not provided them what they need. So they'll have no excuse not to undertake this. And you know, unlike in previous elections, this election date is cast in the Constitution. So I've actually been asking myself, supposing probably the lawyer will chip in and tell us what happens. I was just asking myself, you know, in previous elections, sometimes we used to get excuses why people did not vote on that actual day, and they have to vote on the next day. Yet now, the election date is a constitutional matter. We all know it is going to be on the 8th. In the unlikely event that they fail for logistical challenges and some people have to vote on the 9th, for instance, in the unlikely event, what would be the legal implications of that? I'm just trying to bring out that point so that I show that they actually have no room to fail. They've got to pull this through, and the most importantly is that they've asked for what they need, and it has been given to them. This is a very big exercise, probably bigger than any we ever undertake at a single time in this country. But because they've shown what it is they need, and they've made their requisitions and they've been provided, they've got no excuse not to pull it through on that particular day.
I think very quickly, the answer to your question in terms of extending the voting period, in fact, there shouldn't be that excuse. I think the commissioners are running a bit scared, like somebody was saying recently. They have all this staff and equipment. Now they should proceed to voter education very quickly, so that the people in the village understand that we have these schemes. The kids, when they come here, this is how you do, and then they do their mock elections, so that at least everybody on 8th actually should be able to vote. But in terms of whether they can proceed beyond the 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock of the day, it's a moot issue. Nonetheless, don't forget that courts actually have powers to extend time. If voting would not have been completed by 6 in the evening, would it be unconstitutional for voting to proceed to 10 or 11 o'clock in the night? So there will be people say, oh yeah, that's not acceptable, but what about disenfranchising a good number of people from probably interior, areas where equipment did not arrive in time, there was a breakdown of vehicles or transport is bad. So I think we have to look all that instead of strictly interpreting the law to mean that if you actually vote outside the timings which are given by the law is per se illegal. I do not believe from where I sit that it's necessarily illegal.
All right. Husband, is Kenya ready for its biggest election? Yes.
I think Kenyans are ready for the election. IEBC has demonstrated that they are ready despite the challenges from the political class. And I think, just like we talked about a litigating nation, I think Kenya is big on certain things because people don't get time to read. And it's the reason why IEBC has to go elaborate miles to demonstrate to us through the media that they are ready. But technically, I don't think there is anything to show that they are not ready to carry out this election.
All right. All right, that's why we leave it on this issue. Obviously, we shall continue to look out for more reactions on this, whether this matter will indeed end up at the Supreme Court or this will be the end of it. But that has been the ruling by the Court of Appeal, affirming that earlier decision by the High Court that the presidential election results announced at the constituency level, in fact, at the polling station, should be final. When we return after this quick commercial break, we'll get into a bit of politics on Realpolitik. Take a look at what has been happening, what has been said and done on the campaign trail this past week. There was an accusation by the National Super Alliance leader, Raila Odinga, that Jubilee were planning to use the military to rig the election. There has been some reaction from the Jubilee. Shall be taking a look at that, as well as what's happening in Machakos. Wavinya Ndeti finally given the green light to be on the ballot. That and more shortly when we come back.